Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for your next PB&J card class. And today is the first in a series of 3 videos featuring a simple one-layer masked stamp design. And here's the card that we'll be making in today's video. This features stamps from Penny Black's new Bliss collection, Tulip Q, Time, and Spiritual Snippets. And there will be a full supply list at the end of the video that will include all of the stamps, numbers, names, as well as the ink colors, ink pads, paper, everything that I'm using, and that'll be at the end of the video. So to start out, I really love this style of card design. I don't know what it is about making these little miniature scenes in the center of the card. So I'm going to do 3 videos for you. This is the first. And all I'm using here is painter's tape to mask off my paper. I'm using a 1.5 inch piece on the bottom and then 1 inch pieces along the side and the top. And I'm sticking that to Canson 140 pound watercolor paper. And I'm going to stamp my image using Smoky Gray VersaFine ink. This is a really nice ink. It kind of walks the line between giving you the no-line watercolor look and having it stamped in black. You can still see the outline and the details, but they're not so prominent that your eye doesn't first go to the watercoloring that you do. I stamped it in my MISTI just because that watercolor paper is textured, and I was able to do a couple impressions to get a good impression. And I'm going to paint this in using Distress Ink Re-Inkers. So these give you really bold, vibrant color, and you can paint them like a watercolor. All of the colors will be listed at the end of the video, and I'm starting here with Fossilized Amber. You need just the tiniest drop. The color is very concentrated. That's what I like about these. They're really bright and bold right from the get-go. I like to paint on a layer, first putting my brush down where I want the color to be the darkest, then going back and with a brush that isn't too damp and just blending that in, starting in the white area and working my way down to the initial place where I put the color. Just a few seconds ago you saw I held the brush and sort of used my left hand to squeeze out the bristles, and I was doing that just to remove any excess water. You could also pat your brush dry on a paper towel, but I never seem to have a paper towel when I need it. So off camera, I do that often. I dip my brush into my cup of water to rinse off any extra ink color, then sort of squeeze it out in my hand to remove the excess water. So I'm not going in with too wet of a brush. So this is my first layer, and I did that on just a few of the tulips, that yellow color. Now I'm going to use some Spice Marmalade to get one orange tulip kind of up at the top. You can see there I'll put that concentrated color down at the base of the tulip where I want the color to be the darkest, some of the areas where sort of folded over behind another. And then going back with water, I can blend that so that it starts to get lighter as it extends towards the tips of the petals. I have found with some of these re-inkers, some colors give you more variance as you blend, and some seem to give more of a flat wash. So for me, the Spice Marmalade and the Fossilized Amber, once they dry, it looks a little bit more like a flat wash, but you can go back in and add some shading, which I'll show you as the video progresses. So I'm going in here and just adding that color in. You can see how bold and bright it is. It's just a happy color. I was inspired by some stamping that Michelin Jourdain had shared on her Facebook page using the same stamp, and she had these gorgeous yellow and orange and red tulips. So I was inspired to go with that color scheme on mine. And I'll link to her card down in the YouTube description box below, so you can check that out as well. So now I'm going to use the Fired Brick Re-Inker. Now this is a color I have found gives you really nice variation from light to dark, just all on its own. So you can see I'll put that really dark concentrated color down at the base. I'm rinsing off my brush and coming back in now, starting in the white area and working down. And that just sort of naturally bleeds up into that lighter color at the top. So you just have to experiment. Some colors, even within the same medium, act a little bit differently. But this Fired Brick is really great, and it's a nice red. Sometimes I think reds are hard to find. They're too pink or they're too orange, but this is a really nice red for me. And while it's still wet, you can go in and just add a little bit more color, let it blend out while it's still wet. So I went ahead, I finished all the red ones following the same technique. Everything is dry now, and now I'm going to just add that additional shading that I mentioned before. So on this tulip that was painted with the Spice Marmalade, I'm using just a little bit of fired brick and just adding it in under some of those areas that would be behind or sort of folded underneath where there'd be some shadows. And on the yellow tulips, I'm going to go in now with the Spice Marmalade. So their first color was Fossilized Amber, and now I'm adding just a touch of that Spice Marmalade. That's a really vibrant, bright color, so I don't want too much of it. But you will see it just starts to give a little bit more dimension and give those more of a finished look. I'm just fiddling around here. That's the fun for me, is just going back and keep playing and adding more color till I'm happy with the look. And then the next thing I'll be doing on the red tulips, I wanted to warm them up just a bit. To me, I felt like they looked a little bit more pink than the other colors had been. So I'm taking that Fossilized Amber with just very, very lightly. I'm hardly touching them, and just in a few places on the light areas on the red tulips, I'm just adding a touch of that Fossilized Amber. And you can see that gives them a really pretty golden glow on those light areas. I felt like that tied them in better to the other tulips. For the stems and the leaves, I'm using the peeled paint. Again, a Distress Reinker. You can also use Distress ink pads and press them on your acrylic block, Distress markers, Distress stains, and get the same look. You just may have to add more layers to get that real intensity of the color that you can get with the reinkers. This technique of also stamping just in the little box, the masked box that I've done, you could do that, color your image in with anything, Copic markers, whatever, colored pencils, whatever you like to do, and still have that really fun one layer look. And it's amazing how different the stamps look when they're stamped within that small box with the large masked off frame around the edges. So I'll just continue to paint the stems and the leaves. Now to paint the sky area around the flowers up at the top, I'm using the Salty Ocean. I'll use just water first and paint working in sections, and I'll just paint and make that area wet before I put the paint or the reinker ink down. That helps it blend and have sort of a smoother edge. So you can see when I drop that in, I'm working on a wet surface, so I can keep moving that around before it dries so I don't have any harsh lines where things dry. I do like this to have a little bit of texture, so if there's some splatters or some areas of light and dark, sort of the imperfection of watercolor, that's okay. I do like it to have a touch of that. So here I'm moving on to the next section, adding more water, picking up that color and painting it in. I'm hardly using any of the ink, just barely touching that paintbrush to it, dropping it in. And I don't want to get too much water along that masked area so we don't get any bleed through. I'm also going to add some of this blue underneath those top tulips so that the sky extends beyond just the top row there. And that's one of the benefits of painting for me, is that I can just paint right in between all of these different tulips. If I was doing this with Distress inks, I'd have to mask it off and then apply the ink blending tool. But with paint, I can just paint it right in between all of those and keep things one layer easily. Down here at the bottom, I've wet the area down and I'm just adding some of that peeled paint. Not too much because I want this background to be lighter than the stems and the leaves. There you can see I got a little bit more ink than I wanted, but if you just go in with the paintbrush right away, you can blend that out, pick it up. If you have a paper towel handy, you can also just dab it up if you drop too much down. Before it dries, you have a watercolor is pretty forgiving. kind of darkening up some of the stem areas. Now that that's completely dry, I'm going to add a little bit of Distress ink on top. So the first color I'm using is Mowed Lawn. And this is such a nice, bright, springy green color. I'm just adding it a little bit around the bottom and the edges, especially along that masked area. Here is the Salty Ocean Distress ink. And again, just sort of around that masked area, little touch in the center. But this, when I peel off the tape, will really define those edges. And then finally, I'm going to use Gathered Twigs. That's a nice brown. Gives it a little vintage look. And going all the way around the entire piece. Now you could certainly stop there, but I wanted to add a little bit more stamping, so I've put this back into my stamp positioning tool, the Misty, and I'm using the stamp from Penny Black called Time. And I'm just inking it with VersaFine ink, and that's in the color of Spanish Moss. I'm stamping it several times. Again, I'm on that textured cardstock, and I wanted to just darken up the color. And here I've stamped my sentiment. And my favorite part here is removing the tape and revealing that one layer design with that white frame around it. I'm just slowly pulling that off, and there you have it. Here's a look at that finished card. I will be back very soon with 2 more videos showing the same technique but using different stamps. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, as well as on our website and Instagram. And I'll link to all of those down in the YouTube description box below. And if you stay tuned, here's the supply list showing everything used in creating this card.